All of humanity can be divided into Group A, B, and C. Group A is made up of those people who live principally off stock dividends, interest payments on their bond investments, royalties on their land and mineral holdings, rents on their properties. That's Group A. Group B and C make up the other 99.5% of humanity, and they live off Group B. People in Group B live off wages, salaries, fees, commissions, tips, pensions. And Group C is made up of tens of millions of people who don't even get that. They live in utter destitution from hand to mouth, from whatever handouts or whatever charity bits or whatever fragmentary incomes they can scrounge. The thing that the people in Group A and B have in common is that they both live off the labor of the people in Group B. The people in Group A don't just do this, they're very active. They have an active element. We could call them the owning class because they own almost everything in the world. They own most of the land. They own the factories, the industries, the banks, the media. They also own a lot of the state. That is, their representatives, the politically active elements from their ranks, move in and become the secretaries of defense, secretaries of state, CIA directors, and they're the ones who also filter out in the beginning with the very first primary. The primary before the one you get to vote in is called the money primary, and they, with their contributions, they filter out who will be the suitable candidates and who will be the unknowns, and who will be designated at the very beginning the front runners. Now, they take great pains at trying to keep the world this way because they love it that way.
Because they love it that way.
I know in the movies you see things about the unhappy rich. Don't believe it for a minute. They love having their private planes and their estates and all their wonderful things and their power and their prestige and their immense wealth.
When I was a kid, we went on a holiday to Florida, and in that hire car, we passed over the newly completed Keokuk Hamilton Bridge in Iowa. It looked so fresh and expansive. It was a marvel of engineering, and the whole family was buzzing about how beautiful the bridge was. As a 12-year-old, it occurred to me to ask, who owns the bridge? Whose is it? My father's response stayed with me for the rest of my life. Some rich guy owns the bridge, he said. Since that tender age, I found out some other things some rich guy owns. The big buildings in the cities, the recreational parks, the gardens, and sporting facilities, the prime riverside real estate with lush green dense forests right across from the city, the health spas and swimming complexes, the shiny new buildings with their architect-designed roofs and layouts, the vineyards and acreages right outside of town, and the plush smooth highways that take them in and out of the city, the shipping yards, cement factories, the infrastructure that makes their loot, even the sports stadiums I ate hot dogs in, and even the teams themselves. The elite 1% have a lot to answer for. To amass $1 billion, or even $100 million, you have to get your hands dirty. And I don't mean just dust and dirty fingernails. I mean blood. Fool yourself with the capitalist perfect paradigm that a man acting in his own self-interest will naturally do what is best for society. Really? Really? Capitalism can be traced back to the early Venetians, and specifically the Medici family in Middle Europe, where Medici came into contact with the flourishing Jewish population in Florence. Banca is Latin for desk or counter, which was that simple, clean, flat visual prop used by Jews to exchange money and practice usury. Banka eventually evolving into the word bank. Usury, although banned in the Jewish faith, it was actually not an incursion to lend money to the Gentiles. So the Jews did, and the Medici saw its profit potential. Later in the cities of the 1600s, Amsterdam and London, the newly free Protestant religion, in contrast to Catholicism, which had always banned usury in all its forms, allowed for such double-edged sword activity where the Dutch started the first joint stock exchange with London, which opened up all sorts of ledger book accounting tricks to profit. No work, no effort, just opportunistic cash flow. The capitalist paradigm opened with a bang, starting with a very large scam. The Dutch began observing the sheep-like behavior of their markets and immediately, from the outset, on the very first try, began manipulating the first worthless market, boiled it into a bubble, then popped that creation and counted their spoils. The vehicle was a plant, a shrub that flowers, the tulip. There were no so-called capitalist market forces of supply and demand orchestrating this convoluted market bubble. The only thing that fed and grew the bubble was the ongoing buying behavior and the resulting elevating price action, just like a Ponzi scheme. In fact, not like a Ponzi scheme, but a Ponzi scheme, where all participants knew and understood the music would eventually stop, but also knew that everyone's buying behavior was increasing the returns they made from the previous month, leading to even more buying. There is no market forces. The capitalism we worship, especially in America, is in complete conflict with the democratic society we think we live in. Capitalism even conflicts with the idea that America is a republic. If all the members of society were equal, no manipulation, corruption, nor exploitation would be tolerated nor possible. After all, would you consider a failing business, in 2009's case a failing bank, capitalism, when the government bails them out? The reason a business fails are many and varied, but using tax dollars to prop up and contain a private business whose owner has made errors and decisions that were so bad that it is failing as a business, this can only be called one thing: socialism, or rather capitalism for the poor, but socialism for the rich. Corporate welfare. If you invest your private money and the government says, "Don't worry if your bet on this business fails. We will use taxpayer dollars to pay you what you should have earned." Well, of course, that would be ideal. In fact, there is another word for this. Not socialism, not a republic, nor a democracy. But the capitalist experiment, the economic system we actually have today, is called crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is a system of close relationships between business people and government officials. Its main systems include favoritism in the distribution of legal permits, government grants, special tax breaks, or other forms of state interventionism. It is the final endgame in an experiment that has been evolving for hundreds of years. Him, but not you. Her, but not him. Where government plays favorites and says who lives or who dies, economically speaking. Not the market, not the demand, because it is clear demand does not create supply. But sometime in the last few decades, capitalists have realized that supply, in actual fact, creates demand, a complete reversal of the basic fundamental principles of capitalism. This is how crony capitalism emerged. Deregulation was the lodestone that started it all, back in the 80s, with Reagan and Thatcher. This deregulation saw government get out of the business of governing the country by running essential services and offering things like clean water, health, sanitation, and power utilities to private individuals to be run for profit. But who will receive these ultimate of all businesses? After all, you're not selling breakfast cereals or ice cream cones. These are hardcore businesses, legitimate services that people must have. So who will get these incredibly lucrative contracts? The decision maker's brother, cousin, or close and generous best friend from school. The cronies who have the power divide up the spoils amongst themselves. Nothing could be clearer than this today. So next time you cross a beautiful, glorious bridge, or marvel at man's engineering as the newest skyscraper goes up, or admire the curve of the latest inner-city sports stadium, you too can now be in no doubt who owns that stuff. Some rich guy.
Problem of both parents working because there's no sustaining basis for taking care of their children in a reasonable way. You could all make a list in 10 minutes of the things that need to be done in this society. that are not being done, even though we have the people who would like to do them and all the tools and equipment they could possibly want. An economic system that can be described the way I just did has lost its right to exist. It's a failure. I know that may be difficult, I know it may be painful to hear, but if you're not willfully self-blinded, you've got to see what's going on. Over the last 30 years, the employing class, particularly the large employers, have made a decision. The decision is a rewriting of American history. Through most of our history, from the time that Europeans first came over here and eliminated the local population, the country proved to be very fertile. The rivers, very nice. Coastline, very convenient. You could make a lot of money producing. You had everything you needed with one exception. You didn't have any people to work. And the problem was solved by bringing people from Europe here